Okay, so what if you could use pure logic to prove or disprove the existence of God? Well, today we're diving into a source that tries to do exactly that. It builds the step-by-step case from what it claims is a purely logical standpoint. Let's see how they do it.
Right out of the gate, the source makes this incredibly bold claim. Now look, no matter what you personally believe, our job here is to just neutrally unpack the specific line of reasoning the speaker uses to get to this, well, very strong conclusion.
So how in the world do they build this case? Well, they treat it kind of like a courtroom investigation, basically asking us to set aside all our emotions and just follow the evidence as they present it.
Now, what's really interesting here is that the argument doesn't start with the case against God. No, instead, it first isolates what it sees as the main argument for God's existence, so it can weigh it against all the other evidence later on.
And here's how the source frames the two sides of the debate. On one side, arguing for existence, it puts just Christianity, saying that its belief that God physically walked the earth is a form of physical evidence. Then on the other side, arguing against, it groups together science, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and atheism. This initial setup, well, it's the foundation for the entire argument.
All right, first up in the case against existence is the evidence from science. And this piece of the argument hinges completely on the scientific method.
The logic here is pretty straightforward. Science demands empirical evidence, things you can actually observe and measure. According to the source, since there's no evidence like that for God, science's default position has to be non-existence. So in this logical courtroom, that's Exhibit A for the against side.
And here's where things get really unique. The source now turns to major world religions, not to debate faith or theology, but to do a kind of logical analysis of their own core concepts.
Okay, pay close attention to this slide, because this right here is the logical engine for the entire argument. The source hones in on this one word, inconceivable, which it defines from religious texts as meaning not existing and not non-existence. Then it makes a really critical leap. It claims that, from a purely logical point of view, if something is neither existing nor non-existing, the only possible conclusion is that it simply does not exist. Everything else that follows is built on this one single interpretation. And you can see exactly how this one interpretation gets applied right across the board. The source claims that because Allah in Islam is described as inconceivable, it logically translates to does not exist. It argues the exact same thing for the Hindu concept of Advaita, that being non-dual and beyond form is just another way of saying inconceivable. And Buddhism is shown as the most direct case since it has no God concept at all. So in the source's view, these major religions are actually logically arguing against the existence of God, whether they realize it or not.
Throughout this whole analysis, the speaker keeps using this phrase over and over. It's this constant reminder that the goal here isn't to get into a theological debate, but to apply this very specific, very detached logical framework to the actual language these religions use. So after looking at science and world religions through this very particular lens, the source is ready to move to its final verdict by basically tallying up the score.
The whole courtroom metaphor comes back for the grand finale. The speaker argues that if this were a court case, the decision would come down to the balance of probabilities. You weigh which side has presented the most compelling evidence.
And here it is, the final count. On one side of the scale, the source puts just one argument for existence, but on the other side, it places 5 arguments against science, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and atheism. According to this specific logical framework, the scales are tipped, and tipped heavily. This is the overwhelming evidence the source claimed it was going to present.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? We've seen how a pretty complex argument was built, piece by piece, to reach this really definitive conclusion. But it all boils down to a single powerful assumption. Is the concept of something being inconceivable logically the same thing as it being non-existent? Your answer to that one question determines whether this entire argument stands or falls. Definitely something to think about.